Yeah, and interestingly, if you have to describe working in digital education using a metaphor, what would that be?
Sometimes an element of you feel like you've got a horse and cart. Things don't necessarily go as quickly as you'd like, like we're talking about new technologies and getting up to speed and understanding them. And then sometimes, as I was saying, with like virtual reality, there's like a gap of 10 years before it kind of feels appropriate to start introducing it.
And a roller coaster too.
Oh yes, we've got our roller coaster ride.
When things work really well and you have a fantastic hour, and then the next thing you go into a classroom and something isn't working as it should and you've got 10 minutes to get it ready. It can be a roller coaster in that regard, but it's just, at least it's always interesting.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered by Empowered, the podcast where we dive into open, honest conversation with educators and change makers from across the learning world. I'm your host, Anshul Lau. In each episode, we explore the real experiences of educators with the challenges, their successes, and the human side of digital education. Today, I'm joined by two wonderful guests from Birkbeck, University of London, Adele and Pip. Together, we'll be exploring how careers in digital education are evolving, what it means to work with both established and emerging technologies, and how different experiences shape our journeys in this exciting field. Adele brings a wealth of experience, while Pip offers a fresh perspective into digital education world. So I'm really looking forward to the balance of insight and energy in this conversation today with both of you. Let's get started. Welcome, Adele and Pip. And to begin with, could each of you tell us a little bit about yourself? What brought you into this world of digital education? And anything if you would like to start with where you started and what your role is currently.
Thanks, Anshul. Yeah, thank you for inviting us to do this. It's interesting for me to kind of reflect on a 20-year career in the field of learning technology, e-learning as it was known for a while, digital education. So the terminology has certainly evolved over that time. And I've been working in my current role for about five or 6 years. So even within, these recent times, post-pandemic, things have also changed. Yeah.
Hi, Anshul. Thank you very much. So I actually came from a teaching and academic support background. I've been in my current role as a digital education consultant for 2.5 years, or just shy of 2.5 years. This is my first role in digital education, but previously I worked with international students, foundation students, and providing academic support, really.
Thank you so much. I'm glad, Adele, you mentioned different titles. I think this is the confusion majority of the colleagues have. What is the difference between somebody being a digital education professional, somebody call it e-learning, somebody call it technology enhanced learning professional? So just curious to ask, have you had the similar title since you started, or have you had different titles? And what difference did the title make to the job that you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I started my career as an e-learning coordinator in a quite small college in the UK when the learning technology was mainly online learning like Moodle and classroom technology like a projector and a screen. And even then, in 2005, there was not much classroom technology actually happening. So over, I think, 3 or 4 years, I helped to get that going. And also I was working with JISC regional support centres with e-learning, as we were known then, e-learning coordinators across different regions in the UK. So that actually helped us to kind of define what our roles were and what it should be. And it became apparent that kind of teacher training within the whole world of digital and e-learning was going to be a key piece to integrate, what was otherwise being done as a separate piece of work within the sort of digital learning team or one person, as you know, most places have a token person to kind of help lead what this was going to be. And then in subsequent years, e-learning mainly became a term for online learning and was adopted within corporate in terms of like onboarding systems. And so e-learning courses were a real thing for a long time. And yeah, that was different from what my role as an e-learning coordinator was. So I could understand the challenges of people. And then, you know, learning technologists also have different emphasis in roles in terms of whether they might be supporting like the foundational tools, learning technology systems, etc., and or being involved with teacher training, staff development. And I think a lot of places have a crossover for their teams in terms of those two particular things. I don't know, Pip, if you've made observations along those lines.
It's quite an interesting one in terms of the language used, like you say, because when I was previously known as a teaching fellow, in that role itself, I helped run a foundation program and then also did academic support and also started getting involved more on the Moodle side through my own interest. And then when I wanted to apply to come into this field, there were lots, like you say, there's e-learning specialists, there's learning technologists, there's instructional designer, there's DigEd consultant. And yeah, it was certainly trying to navigate what is involved in that particular role and what exactly are you doing, because the roles themselves are diverse. And like you said, Adele, they can cross over quite a few different areas. And certainly, as we'll probably discuss later, the types of projects we've done have involved quite a few different teams. So it's like almost a different language in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our listeners, I must mention that it's a very spectrum, digital education, all the titles, every institution would have a different hierarchy of how they would want to call it, what role and responsibilities that role might incorporate. And Pip, you mentioned that you came to this field 2.5 years back. And so what made you interested in becoming a digital education or joining as a learning technologist? And was there a particular moment or a module or project that sparked your interest in this field?
I was very fortunate that I started to get quite an organic interest in it with just learning how to do different things. And then I became known in the team I was in at the time as the person who started to understand and know a bit more about Moodle, which is really funny when I think about what I knew then versus what I know now. But it started as an interest, and then I would reach out to one of the learning technologists. I'm trying to remember if that's the exact title, one of the learning technologists, to show me how to do different things. And then I found I was getting increasingly interested in knowing how to do things on Moodle, and had a chat with the head of learning technology at my previous institution to ask, how do I get into this field? Is there anything you feel I should know or learn or study? And he was very generous. Well, the previous learning technologist I worked with and the head of learning technology were very generous, gave me a lot of advice. But it started really as a general interest, and then I just wanted to know how to do more things, and I started to teach people within my team how to do things. So, yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. And
And
from your
I started
Adele.
in a similar way as well, just in terms of enjoying showing people how to do things with computers, thinking about teaching. Then I did IT teacher training, so I feel like that stood me in good stead, having an understanding of how teaching happens, and pedagogy in terms of application of learning technology. I think that's one way in. I think the other way in is through people knowing the administrative features of systems like Moodle really well, and how to apply that to large institutions, some of the decision-making piece around different types of learning technologies. There can be ways into this field of work through that as well. And as I say, for a lot of people, it seems to be that there's a mix of those two things.
Especially in our team, there's a really diverse way that people got into it, actually, which is really interesting.
And some of the decision making, when you come for an interview, just thinking back to when we were interviewing for Pip's post when I got interviewed in this role, it sometimes just depends on what skills you bring and what the organisation that you're interviewing for needs. So well, I got fortunate because at the time I applied, there was more than one role that was necessarily going to be recruited. Same with when Pip got interviewed as well. And sometimes you can get lucky even if you've not been working in this field, but you've demonstrated an aptitude, you've got particular experience in a certain way, and you show that you can really contribute to teamwork. And if an organisation has got scope to help you kind of, enable you to come in and then help them and kind of navigate where they're going, then that's also something that can be contributed by bringing in your experience from other organisations. That's something that's really valued when you move jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adele, thinking back to when you started, you mentioned 20 years back, the role has also evolved. What's something you know now that you wish you knew then? Is there anything that you can think of?
I think that I'm not sure. I think that the variety of job roles is something that's interested me. I mean, I always like new things. I like to work on new, I like to work on innovation. So from that point of view, this kind of role is ideal for me because I like to be thinking ahead. What's the next technology that we then have to think about in terms of applying in an education setting? So I think that that's really interesting. I think it's important to know as you have a long career that this field of work is a small world and that you might end up working with people again over a different time period. So I now work with at least two people that I worked with 15 years ago. And in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I've kind of crossed paths and we've had people in our team that I've worked with before. And so it's important to kind of know that ahead of time, of course, we're never rude to anyone ever, but it's really important that you're not because of the, as I say, the amount of crossover there might be at different jobs, but also projects like with national organisations and how your paths might cross again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a small world, and it's a thing. We are a very digital, like all the digital technologies are very passionate people, and a community connects us. And I must mention to our listeners, I met Adele a few years back at a conference I hosted at Staffordshire University, and that was the first time I met Adele. And since then, we have been connected. So I just wanted to give a background to that, to mention that the paths do cross over for shared learning experience and knowledge sharing as well. And so Pip, just basically wanted to ask you, so what, I think in your role since you've started, what are the most exciting opportunities that you find right now? I know you were identified as a digital champion when you were a teacher, and now moving on to this career. What are the most exciting opportunities that you see right now? And how do you think your prior experience translated into digital education work, if at all?
I'll answer the latter one first.
Yeah.
I think I have a lot of experience of designing courses and redesigning courses. So when I joined, within a couple of months, I was on the HyFlex project team, which involved designing a HyFlex development course for the academics who would then be using HyFlex in the classroom. So that was really helpful to have a good knowledge of how courses are constructed and the different facets you need to consider. And it's been iterative. So thinking about development and using the feedback, that in itself has been really exciting because first of all, your learners are different from students to academics and anyone else who needs to use HyFlex. But you're also seeing behind the scenes, as it were. So before I was in the classroom a lot, with students a lot, and now you're getting to kind of lift the curtain as it were, and see how things work from that perspective. But in terms of what is really exciting. And again, this feeds into probably my own interest, thinking about digital literacy going forward, because now we've got AI, generative AI, and different approaches to it. You know, some universities don't want it used at all. Some are okay using it and have different kind of levels. So teaching people how to be digitally literate now is going to be very different, and probably needs to start obviously a lot younger. So that's a personal interest as well as something that I think is a really exciting opportunity now, because we've also got generations of people that are going to be growing up with this as well. So moving forwards, we need to make sure we are very cognizant of how things work and the effects they have.
Yeah, my observations on that is that it can be different for the different generations in terms of the skills that they need. With the younger people, they're growing up with technology, but they might not necessarily be understanding how to apply that in study or academia. But also the balance in terms of us being educators, and the balance that our students need in terms of soft skills, in-person conversations, presentations, that kind of thing. I just feel like that's also an important balance for us to be bringing in our curricula. There's for students who are older, maybe more emphasis on the digital skills, but students coming in, there's kind of much more of a balance, and also a balance needed, and also in terms of like employability skills, and you know what we should be covering in education, you know, to once more equip students with skills for jobs that don't exist yet, even more so than they have been in the last 20 years. You know, like sometimes I used to say to students, you know, your job might not exist, it might not exist until sort of 10 years time, but now it's almost like 3-4 years time there'll be new jobs, and people, you know, we're all working on trying to understand on what they are.
Yeah, before we proceed further, I think this is a very interesting point. I would like to talk about that. But for our listeners, I would mention, like Pip mentioned, HyFlex learning. For your understanding, HyFlex learning is a short form for hybrid flexible. It's a teaching approach that combines online and in-person learning components, offering students flexibility in how they engage with the material. I just thought I'll mention it so that you know that this is what we're talking about. And coming back, I think you've rightly mentioned, Adele. I feel that over the period, I feel that this digital education sector still feels safer because our roles are also evolving with the pace technology is growing. We are expected, and we are the ones who are working as a maybe bridge or translator between pedagogy and tech. So in a way, it's not moving out. So role is evolving, shifting, and transitioning. So the roles would still be there. What would be your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think you're right. And actually, in terms of the flexibility and creative thinking as skills that are needed within our roles, and that kind of curiosity and an ongoing aptitude for learning new technologies, thinking about how it's applied for teaching, they're really important skills to kind of be developed and working on, as well as the kind of influencing piece that we need to do with decision makers at the top of our organisations, and being able to kind of represent our knowledge, findings, when we've been privileged enough to be doing pilots like we've done, taken our time over HyFlex teaching that Pip mentioned, and that's been really valuable in terms of getting student insights and feedback and the benefits that we kind of thought as hypotheses. So that's another kind of skill, like taking your understanding of technology, learning, approaches to different projects, and thinking, okay, what's my hypothesis around what we're trying to do here, and how can we create a project and do an evaluation that would test some of these hypotheses, because there's so much that's unknown. And so like walking into the unknown on certain projects, new ways of teaching like HyFlex, can be really quite intimidating, but it's really important to have the support of an organisational, strategy, and that's certainly what we encountered here in terms of the desire to facilitate flexible teaching in this way at Birkbeck.
Yeah, I think you've touched upon few things even in the previous answers that you were sharing. That one has to be innovator. We are working in the unknown field and in the future. So what are the common traits that you feel digital technology should be working with? Because in other professions, people need to be confident in what they're doing. Whereas on the contrary, digital education or educator or technologists work with on the projects, on the unknowns, and they are expected to find out the solutions to make a bridge for everybody else to get comfortable with. So do you feel any common traits like being curious is one of them, inquisitive is one of them? So are any common traits that you look for when you are in the interview panel or if you're looking for a new skill in your team? What are the key skills that you look for in a digital technologist?
Yeah, as I said before, aptitude as much as anything. So aptitude could be from understanding teacher training, pedagogy, could be an emphasis on that side of things, but with an aptitude in the digital skills for particular technology that we're already using in our organisation, and equally it could be more knowledge of some of those learning technologies, but we're also with an aptitude in terms of working with senior managers, for example, and working with academics and understanding the subject that of the academics that you work with. That can also be another way in. So thinking about if you've got a particular degree in a certain area, and then you've got aptitude in working with online learning environments and video recording and things like that, and then you might be able to get a job in terms of working in the subject area that you previously studied, but you're working as a learning technologist. And I think that's also a really valuable way into this career path.
And even there is no such even qualification in this field that is required. And so, yes, Pip, you were saying something, and is there a possibility to even mention that? Have you experienced that people need to have qualification or experience, or it's just the skill that you mentioned are needed?
I think to extend what Adele was saying, having a certain openness to trying out different technologies is really helpful. So when I joined here, I now kind of not control, but I'm in charge of the licenses for Miro. From my teaching background, I think there was an interest in that because it's something that I could have seen myself using, but I also know about other tools we have available, and I wouldn't recommend it for absolutely everything. So having that sort of openness and creativity to try out different things, and then you can make those recommendations. But qualifications, it's an interesting one. So when I spoke to the head of learning technology at my previous institution, he mentioned an MSc in digital education. And when I looked into it, it really felt like it would add a lot of benefit because it gives you a foundation of the pedagogy behind digital education. And I think that taps into sometimes a bit of confusion over what digital education actually is. Sometimes I think it can be seen as just IT, that we will know how to use the computers, switch them on, and know how to use the screens. But actually it's a lot more than that, because it does feed into a different pedagogical way of doing things. So I certainly have found that I've got a lot of benefit, a huge benefit from doing my MSc. I'm just about to do a research methods and then my dissertation. So I've done all my content. And again, it just highlights how broad the field is. You can be interested in gamification, you can be interested in information literacy. But for me, I feel like then the knowledge I've had from that has helped me in this role. And I also think it helps when you're speaking to academics, particularly when you think of the kind of fields of language we use. You can justify some of the reasons for using technologies and certain things like that with a really good, sound pedagogical basis.
Yeah.
because if say, for example, you aren't particularly technologically adept, then you could see it as just throwing lots of technology into your way of teaching. Whereas if someone can justify pedagogically why it's of benefit, I think that's really helpful. I've also done an associate CMOL, which recognises, you know, your more kind of practical side of what you've done. So personally, I would say yes, because I've seen the direct benefit.
And it also helped Pip, I think, and other colleagues that have got that kind of experience or background to kind of hit the ground running in terms of being able to get involved with the work that we have as a team at Birkbeck, and, you know, being able to apply what they already know, and in terms of writing for academia and that the kind of approaches that are accepted in this kind of organisation. It certainly helps to have a certain amount of experience to be applying for a certain level of digital education consultant or learning technologist. So it's worth looking at the kind of where the job level sits within an organisation. For me, as well, I'd kind of updated my skills in 2019 because I'd worked in corporate sector for a bit. I'd been keeping in touch with academic forums and research, particularly around kind of virtual campus, virtual reality, those kind of things that seem to have taken a long time to kind of hit into. And this is the other observation that I've made in terms of new technologies coming out, might not immediately hit in the learning technology world, but it's worth us as professionals keeping a track on what some of these things are, so that we can kind of plan and think ahead. And part of my keeping up to date was part of those being part of academic forums and research, but also I did a certificate, an online certificate, master's certificate in 2019 for it was a business administration, because I'd run my own business. I wanted to kind of get a certificate to say this person understands business, running a business accounts, etc. But also that qualification was in Moodle, and it was a use of Moodle that I'd not actually seen before or since, because the organisation that I studied with had, you know, a particular template on there, the way they'd organised their videos, etc., etc. And all of that, just doing that recently in terms of then getting a job and working through the pandemic, was actually really helpful in terms of just experiencing from a remote learning perspective. And you've done the same, haven't you, remote learning?
I was just going to say that. It's interesting you've mentioned that, because also when you study in that way, you see how the virtual learning environment has been used in a different context. My MSc is online only, and as you said, I can see how they've used their virtual learning environment. When I speak to academics teaching HyFlex, I can speak from a student's perspective who is only going to attend online, to an extent, obviously, different circumstances, but that experience is helpful in itself, because you add a level of personal experience that otherwise you may not get. Plus, it's, as Adele said, the networking you get from those study opportunities. You meet with people that are in all sorts of different roles. So there are a couple of learning technologists on the course, there are a lot of teachers, and also the academics themselves. So in that, you get access to a lot of different experience.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. I think even with my experience over the period, I feel that doing this qualification helped me establish my career, move up the ladder depending on the position, like Adele mentioned. It helps you move faster and go up in the career. But like if you do not do any of these engagement of it, be it association with learning technology, there are different levels. You can be an associate, certified member. I think this basically gives you a kind of confirmation that you do not have to prove that to interviewers or your line managers. It's an accreditation where it confirms that this level of skills that you have. And I would agree with Pip that even doing that MSc gave a foundational understanding of the pedagogical perspective before technology. Earlier in my early careers, like you mentioned, it reminded me my all approach was technology led. I was showing everybody what I know in terms of technology. Whereas after learning, like I also finished this master's from Edinburgh a few years back, then approach changed where I used to ask what you need it for based on the pedagogical requirement. Then I could suggest things. And anybody new into this, yes, Adele.
One of the things I love about this role is the importance of using the technology to solve a problem.
Yeah,
And because when you're thinking about learning technology, it should always be about the learning before the technology. So
absolutely.
I think when you've been working as a consultant, you kind of build up ideas in your toolbox from working with different subject areas, how things have been done and solved problems in terms of student group work, collaboration, individual progress, recapping online materials, and so all the challenges that we have that we now we call out accessibility now perhaps much more than we did 10 years ago, and the importance of using the technology to solve a multitude of accessibility problems. And I think that's what I enjoy, because it kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier about creative thinking, problem solving as well. And at times, sometimes you need to know the depth of what a system can do in order to help somebody solve a problem who might just be using that tool or system at a surface level, but they've got a situation with students that they need to manage. And so then understanding the depth of what that tool can do is really important in terms of consultation and then working with people.
Yep, absolutely. And you even mentioned that in our field, we do tend to explore and new products or tools are do coming in. So how do you personally learn new tools or platform if you have to? Do you prefer formal training, peer support, or do you just do experimentation on hands yourself?
I never read instructions, hardly ever. And I'm the same with when I get a new device at home, I hardly ever look at the book, I read the instructions, and then I can waste a bunch of time trying to work it out myself, in which case I've learned certain things work, some things don't, and then I go back to the instructions probably. And I think that's a little bit how you perhaps think of when we create guides and resources for the people that we support, and they don't necessarily read it, they just want to kind of get hands-on and have a go. So I can understand it from that point of view.
My example will be Miro again, because that was not a technology I was familiar with until I came here and then started managing the licenses. So I just went in and started playing around. I did also go to a couple of their introductory training sessions they have, which are very good. But yeah, my first instinct was to go in and try it out and think, okay, well, if I was to teach, what would I use this for? What would it be good for? What benefit would it bring me? So then trying to create things like that and just experimenting. And that's one of the things that's really fun, actually, is when academics have said, oh, I hear we have Miro licenses, this is what I'd like to do. And then you also learn more about the app, because the academics will say, well, I want to try and do this. And if you don't know immediately, you can either have a go together, or if they want to have a go, then they can show you what they've done. So sometimes it can be quite a mutual learning experience, which is really enjoyable.
I think we have a challenge in terms of companies like Apple who set the bar in terms of usability. The fact that most people can pick up an iPhone and tap things and work things out. So even with designing new classroom technology as we have been, and we've got touch screens in the room, but people started getting used to having touch screens on their monitors on the PC, so they're tapping on the monitors on the PC sometimes. So that's interesting. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to make the usability like fairly straightforward without having to look too closely at the guidance and resources. So that has been, for me, that's been a major change in terms of, you know, as I say, devices, individual devices and usability, and how you might take some of the concepts and criteria from those into what we're doing with learning technology.
Because I think even if you look at the technology life cycle model, I would classify both of you as innovators, that you would learn, pick up hands-on, because over the period you have developed an approach that you can pick up anything new, find out approaches where people could get stuck and create guides and help them. So if you have to encourage somebody that was very reluctant to technology, how do you tackle those kinds of situations at your workplaces? Because as we would come across, many academics staff would not pick up, even if you have touch screen, they would not touch the screen until somebody show them it can be touched, how it can be used. So how do you basically go on with your approach over the period? How has it evolved?
So there's an element of, you know, what we try and do in terms of modeling approaches and learning technologies when we have meetings or training sessions, and taking the opportunities while we've got people who've booked in for a training session that we might showcase something as part of the delivery of our training, so they kind of can see that. Same with setting up like a program, like a teacher training program, where you'd have the teaching model that we have in Moodle, which is pre, live and post session, and kind of setting up those kind of teacher training programs to model and demonstrate some of the functionality and activities that you can use in Moodle, which then they might then take and use with their students. And then we, you know, fortunately this year we've had a system called ThingLink, which is a 360 camera image. So we took a picture of our classroom, and we were able to put hotspots in explaining what each thing does, and also do a kind of walkthrough video, just kind of showcasing how to switch it all on. If people then wanted to watch that, and then we made this room that we're in as a professional development room, so people can then come in and try and work individually, having kind of briefed themselves in terms of looking at resources that will help them. That's just within this area of technology. We've got some really nice opportunities with virtual reality, and a studio to create content, and a classroom to use that with students. And there can be an element of needing a person around, like a technician kind of role, to kind of help facilitate some of things when you've got really brand new types of technology. But with the classroom work, we tried to sort of build on the skills that we knew people already had, and build the design of the room in conjunction with that.
I think for me, it starts with, what do you need to do? What do you want to do? And finding a technology, if one is required, that can help facilitate the goals that they're trying to achieve. And doing it incrementally, as I said, if you add in lots of technology all at once, it's just going to be too overwhelming. But I think that's where it's quite helpful, my teaching background, because I can easily imagine, if I was in the classroom, what would I want to be able to do, and also not trying to manage too many things at once. So what problem, as Adele said, what problem are you trying to solve? But also sometimes it's helpful because technology can make things more accessible. So adding that element in, that actually if we use this piece of technology or this app, this will mean a wider range of your students will have a better experience, for example. Just, I think incrementally, especially if you're working with people who are reticent around technology.
And we always encourage people to take things sort of a step at a time. So, you know, for the first few weeks, they're getting used to kind of logging into a new system, working in a classroom with students, and they might getting to know students and things like that can be a challenge enough in itself. And as learning technologists, we always want to try and make the technology, as I say, secondary to the learning and the pedagogy. So as much as possible, making the usability and the design and approach to it as invisible as possible, so people don't notice. It's like if it's working, you feel connected with people. You learn things. You're not kind of being stopped by user problems and barriers and passwords and things like that. So it's such a journey, particularly now with things like multi-factor authentication, the importance of being secure in our organizations with data and data transfer. And I think it's really important to be working across your teams in IT and information services in terms of making those things as simple as possible, so people don't give up at the first hurdle.
And in your experience, do you work a lot in collaboration with academic staff or students to make your project successful? And do you have a partnership between them established, or do you involve them on a need basis?
So last year, I spoke to our employability and careers team because whilst we had developed a really, if I may say so, great HyFlex development program with really helpful input from academics, which helped us then develop it later, I felt like we hadn't thought about what the students would need, because actually, as we talked about earlier, with the different generations of students coming through, we can't assume that everyone's a digital native, especially in a college like Birkbeck, because we have such a wide range of different students. So through the Access Foundation, I was able to set up an internship for 3 students to help design and develop a HyFlex for Students course, which focuses on the kinds of skills that you'll need and how to manage your HyFlex learning experience, choosing which mode might be best for you, what that experience might look like. So that was a really helpful way of getting to work with students, and it's something I would like to do again, but that was because there was a specific need. I'd identified a need to do that.
And we also have, within our structure of our team, we have faculty-facing DigEd teams for the three faculties in the organisation. So then when we're working on cross organisational projects, then we work with the leaders of those faculty teams and people within those teams to support us in kind of bringing things into fruition within those subject disciplines, and also the heads of education that represent those faculties. So then we work with those academics in terms of kind of supporting, how things within a project or a pilot and research and discovery in those areas can then be brought in to the wider faculty and schools.
Those relationships are really important, I think, in this kind of role. I think Adele's identified that we work across such a broad spectrum. So, for example, me having found out where I can create an internship from, I've got a really good relationship with the careers team now, and I know a bit more about what they do and how we can work together. Also with I'm actually a digital education consultant, as we mentioned, so I work with the School of Historical Studies, so I have my contacts in there. Some of them are doing HyFlex, so there is that kind of dual relationship there, which is very, very helpful for kind of building trust when we're rolling out these pilots and wanting feedback. So relationship building, especially in this role, is really important. But one of the things I also learned coming into this field, when you teach, it's very clearly defined. So there are administrative processes that you don't get involved in because it's absolutely not your remit and you shouldn't know about them. Whereas here, I found you cross over in a wider range of areas, which I think is where the sense of openness needs to come in.
and that can happen in my observation, having worked in large organisations and smaller organisations. What Pip's just described particularly happens in smaller organisations. It kind of suits me to work in this kind of organisation because I feel like it uses experience that I've had in lots of different areas, where when I've worked in larger organisation, I've worked in a particular field or area, like, for example, administrating Moodle. As a contractor, which I did that for a bit. And then another role, I was creating support, help desk resources, and doing that kind of work. And other jobs I've done, teacher training on systems, and it can be very much like it's all separate. So coming into then, progressing through your career and coming into a environment where you can kind of pull in all of these different separate experiences, and work in an advisory role as well, to like senior leadership. So it's one of those things where sometimes you hit a sweet spot of like a particular role and how it works with the experience and the skills you've got.
Yeah, and if somebody is in digital learning profession in somebody's early careers and compared to somebody who's been there for a few years, what kind of support, be it mentoring, networking, or training, would you suggest would help them the most right now in the landscape you are?
So I would recommend getting involved with the ALT community, Association Learning Technology. That I've been involved with them since 2006, early days. They also have a certified member kind of certificate, where if you've got to a certain level of learning technology, achieving that certificate can really help you in terms of showcasing your knowledge and moving up a role. But getting in on the ground floor, I think sometimes that those roles can now be advertised as kind of like media support or something, media technician. Look out for those kind of job roles. And then, the importance of getting into an organisation, finding a work buddy, finding someone who's a little bit further in their journey than you, who can kind of share your experience. I'm sure Pip will be happy to tell you about her experience in that, change roles.
Yes, I have a few thoughts on this. Adele's certainly been a mentor for me since I came here because of the experience she's got and the wide range of experience. Also, as I mentioned before, with having kind of clearly defined roles and then moving into this particular role where it's quite varied, it was really helpful to speak to Adele about our role within this, and also Adele knows different areas that you can get involved in, which has opened a lot of opportunities for me. But I would say stepping back before you even get to applying for jobs, if you're in a position to, so for example, like I was teaching, try to use some technology if appropriate in your role. So different apps, or having a really good understanding of how your learning environment works as much as you can. Speaking to those people that are in those roles. So either, as the way Adele mentioned, through ALT, or just people within your own institution. But also recognising the skills you may already have that are going to be applicable. Yeah. So my course writing, course developing experience has been infinitely useful in this role, as well as knowing some basics of Moodle and knowing a few apps. So even if you aren't in a role where you have access to a virtual learning environment, for example, maybe you've been a student and you've got experience of being on a virtual learning environment and what that user experience was like and what you may have learned from that. So thinking of the ways you can apply the skills you've got to what would be useful, because again, these roles are so varied. It's not that you'll come from absolutely nothing. Maybe you're particularly good with your phone and you're very adept at learning new apps and things in that way. There's quite a different range, but certainly using the people you know around you that may have experience in this field or work in this field and speaking to them about, the realities of what it's like. As said, I feel my qualifications have been really helpful. So thinking about whether that might be right for you as well.
I think there's also for anyone listening who's got particular coding skills, data analyst, learning analytics, those things are really important in the learning technology systems that we use, really essential to kind of help with our decision making on where we spend money and investment. And so, with some learning technology systems, there's certainly numbers of people that work behind the scenes in those organisations and job roles, and it's worth looking at, and particularly, with generative AI and how that can be integrated into kind of creating learning analytic dashboards, things like that. I think I'm speaking to up and coming programming students who might be looking at getting jobs, but I think there's lots of opportunities in this field.
And you both mentioned, I think, very valuable suggestions. It's particularly around membership with Association for Learning Technologies and exploring different accreditation program, and also MSc. With engaging with both of these things and various several CPD, what my experience has been that it's like a commitment of a person to learn these things, and it costs time, effort, and eats away your own evenings and weekends. So if we have to suggest something, so how do you think organizations can support early careers professional entering the digital education field rather than individuals or professionals making time by themselves?
I mean, we have quite a flexible leave system here in terms of taking sort of study leave when we need to kind of work on an application with regards to showing our knowledge or even getting familiar with new technology. Some of that is part of the job, and you would consult with your line manager in terms of the time you take to need that. I think that within digital education teams generally there's that understanding that that's what we need to be doing, because we're always kind of on cutting edge of new things coming in, and then working with enthusiasts. Very often work with enthusiasts from the academic world, because it kind of is a bit of a time saver in terms of quickly identifying where certain technologies can be applied.
Job shadowing is also helpful, but I think having those conversations about your interests. So with your line manager, for example, what areas are you interested in? Is there space within your workload to go and either shadow someone or find a way of including elements of that in your current work would be really helpful. One course, I just want to shoehorn this in because I know an MSc is not possible for everyone, and in terms of an option of study, it is obviously more of a commitment financially and with time. But for those who are teaching, particularly English for academic purposes, the University of Sheffield used to do a shorter course called Learning Technologies in EAP, and that was the very first bit of study I did. It was really popular, and I remember being so excited when I got on it because you had to wait for a little bit to get on because there was a wait list. But again, it just introduced I think it's called the SAMR model, SAMR model. So again, a little bit of pedagogy foundation there, and then started to introduce different technologies. So as a course that was absolutely worth its weight in gold, but less of a time and financial commitment, that was very helpful too.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. Even I did that course. It was a tremendous learning experience for me. And I feel that even if you're early careers professional and you want to progress in the field, you do not have to make any investment. I feel starting with you, even if you attend some CPD events, conferences, that also offers a good learning and exposure, meeting new colleagues and from different organizations, learning about their approaches, their projects that they've been working with, definitely offers a lot of scope for new learning experiences. And
if you're working in an area of education and you want to progress and you want to study a master's if you've already got a postgraduate, or if you do a PGCE, which now will have elements of digital learning included in it anyway. But just thinking about how some educational organisations have professional development provision for staff to kind of work it, on a master's or something, and have a contribution to the fees on that. Some organisations do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I have to ask you, if there was one myth or one misunderstanding about digital education career that you would like to share with our listeners, what would that be? I know it will be different from both your perspective and your experience that you have got.
Some people think we're the IT people.
But I believe at Birkbeck you sit within the IT. Maybe that's why. Do you think? Or in general, do you think there is a confusion? People think they're IT.
I think when people hear digital, that maybe all they hear and immediately forget about the education bit at the end. So there's a
Yeah.
lack of understanding of the depth of the pedagogical knowledge our team has, which then, that shouldn't be undervalued at all, because it helps us really understand what's required in the teaching world, along with obviously working with academics. But I think Adele hit the nail on the head. Everyone thinks we're just IT.
Absolutely, I'll agree with that. Everybody thinks that even if they get any digital IT problem, they would reach out to digital learning professionals because they have experience of working with us so more closely. They think we would know the answer. In fact, I've helped somebody with an IT problem, and they thought I'm an IT person. And
yeah, it's because we're so approachable.
yeah, absolutely.
That's I'm sure that's why.
It's a really good chance when that happens to still make a connection with someone and actually explain, okay, so whilst we don't do that, this is what we do, so please do come to us if you have issues in this area. And quite often that's led to, oh wait, actually I do have a question about Moodle. So it's a chance to then build a relationship with that person.
Yeah, and interestingly, if you have to describe working in digital education using a metaphor, what would that be and why? You can take your time. Anything that comes to your mind.
Well, we've had a lot of transport related banter recently in terms of the project that we've been working on. There's sometimes an element of you feel like you've got a horse and cart going on. Things don't necessarily go as quickly as you'd like, like we're talking about new technologies and getting up to speed and understanding them. And then sometimes, as I was saying, with like virtual reality, there's like a gap of 10 years before it kind of feels appropriate to start introducing it to the education world. And so there's that kind of, sometimes there can be that kind of plodding along.
Different transport each day, I think, is a good
yes. I mean, recently we were did an image of a Japanese bullet train, because a colleague had been to Japan recently. He was talking about the amazing bullet trains, and there was an element of, please can we see the integration of HyFlex teaching in the next 2 years, like as a right, we know what we're doing now, let's really go for it, kind of.
And a roller coaster too.
Oh yes, we've got our roller coaster ride.
When things work really well and you have a fantastic hour, and then the next thing you go into a classroom and something isn't working as it should and you've got 10 minutes to get it ready, it can be a roller coaster in that regard, but it's just, at least it's always interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I could resonate with roller coaster. Or maybe somebody working in an adventure park, every day is a new experience. You're working with a different ride, managing that through how it works and how people enjoy that. But I really love the analogy you shared.
Yeah, because certainly if you don't like every day being the same, this is the kind of job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're also very fortunate in this team that we can get involved in such a variety of things, but that means you get to stretch your skills. So I would say, if you are looking for roles, do ask what kinds of projects can you be involved in, because here it can be very kind of pedagogically focused, or it can be very application heavy, or both, and you get to choose kind of your interests as well, which is a benefit. But certainly ask what kinds of things you'd be involved in.
And we nearly come towards the end of our podcast today, and it was lovely talking to you both. I would like to ask you, if someone listening today is just entering the field of digital education, what's one mindset or habit you would encourage them to develop on early on if they're unsure on where to start?
Yeah, I think some of the skills that we kind of touched on earlier in terms of curiosity, that's something that can really be developed individually. Thinking about, getting to understand the technology, but also then getting to understand how businesses or schools, universities function. And so then, having creative solutions because of your knowledge of technology, but also having people skills are so important. I mean, I remember I used to teach level 3 sort of A-level IT, and the importance of working with people, soft skills, communication, organization, like really transferable skills, which we all kind of need to be working on anyway, in light of what I was saying about, there's so many jobs that don't exist yet, and these transferable skills are going to be your way of navigating what could be quite a volatile kind of employment world in the next sort of 10, 20 years. So I just think that all of those things are relevant to learning technologists.
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Good sense of humour. Pip is always very valued in our meetings in terms of her sense of humour. It can get quite stressful at times when, as I say, you feel like you're in a horse and cart plodding along and you just want to see something working well. And that can sometimes take time when you're working with technology. Having a sense of humour in terms of just helping take the pressure off. It helps the resilience as well. There's an element of resilience that you need in this job, and as I say, kind of perhaps a volatile kind of employment outlook as well. Yeah.
I think we don't put those soft skills in the job specs. I think we should put that. We need a humorous person, joyful person, cheerful person who adds to their curiosity, passion towards learning, who can work in a challenging environment. That would be an ideal job description for a learning technologist or somebody working in a digital education field, because we all love working with people. We are working with educators to make a difference to their learning experience, and that all adds to the joy. And before we close, where can listeners find more about your work, or if they want to get in touch for further discussion?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn.
So we'll share your LinkedIn profile links in the description.
I will be on LinkedIn, so eventually I'll be there.
So for our listeners,
a presentation at Advanced HE in Sheffield on the 2nd of July. So anybody who's attending that conference, I think it's online as well as in person. So we're talking about our HyFlex teaching project there, and we also have other kind of project presentations that we might be able to share externally for people who are interested, but they can contact me via LinkedIn, just Adele Cushing. In direct message me if you've got any questions or queries.
And thank you so much for mentioning that. We will share all the contact details in the chat, the description of this podcast. And we would also like to invite you again to talk more about your HyFlex learning project at Birkbeck, because I'm sure all our listeners would be very curious. Pip and yourself have mentioned it quite a couple of times. So I thought I did not ask more because I thought it's an opportunity it's a big topic. So we'd rather cover as a separate topic, or you can even come on Empowered webinars and at least briefly showcase what it is, so people can know more about the project. And thank you so much for participating today. And that brings us to the close of today's episode of Unfiltered by Empowered and a heartfelt talk with Adele and Pip for sharing their stories, reflection, insights on what it truly means to build a career in digital education. And for all our listeners, we hope this conversation has sparked some ideas, offered encouragement, and perhaps even nudged you to reflect on your own journey. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for more unfiltered conversation with passionate educators from around the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep empowering change. Thank you.